This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. This week, I want to talk to you about rigor. If you haven't watched our videos on empathetic course design, you should check them out. They're awesome. And in those videos, I talk about how infusing empathy into all aspects of your course is going to make the course better for your students and better for you. And you can infuse empathy into your syllabi, your course structure, your course policies, your schedule, your assignments, your assessments. Empathy and all of those things are going to make courses better for you and for your students. In those videos, I also made a statement that I think that empathy is more important than rigor. I also made the statement that empathy is more important than rigor in a workshop I gave recently in empathetic course design. And after that workshop, a colleague came up to me and said, well, what do you mean by rigor? And why should I or should I not include that in my courses? And I get to think a little bit more deeply about my thoughts about rigor, and that became the inspiration for today's video. Rigor is something that I've thought about throughout the entirety of my teaching career. And I think there are different ways to think about rigor. I know I've thought about rigor in different ways. One way to think about rigor is that we should make our courses hard. You've probably seen people take the perspective that their courses should be hard and take pride in making their courses hard. You may have seen colleagues brag about how low the scores are in an exam. You may have seen them brag about how hard it is to succeed in their class, how hard it is to perform well on their assignments and their assessments. If you're applying rigor in this way, what it means is that you're only going to have the highest performers in your class do well in your class. They're only going to be the best performers are going to do well on that standard that you've set up. Maybe you see people use a grading curve so that only the absolute highest people on that curve are going to get high grades in the class. You may have some of your colleagues tell you on the first day of class, they tell students how hard the class is going to be, how impossible it is to succeed. Maybe even look at other students in the room and kind of guess which ones are not going to be surviving that class successfully through the end. In my own experience, I had an English professor on the first day of my first year English class tell us that none of us would be getting A's in her class because A's mean perfection, and we're all too young for that. In my general psychology class, we also were graded on the bell curve so that the average grade in the class was a C. In order to get a B, you had to perform one standard deviation above the rest of the class. And to get an A, you had to perform two standard deviations above the rest of the class. So what this meant is that my grade was not only dependent on my performance, but it was dependent on the performance of my classmates. If my classmates did better, I did worse. When instructors use rigor in that way, what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to inspire their students to kind of embrace that challenge, to lean into the competition and to really work hard and to excel. And that may work for some students, but for other students, it may not. In particular, this could negatively impact first generation students, students from underrepresented groups, students who struggle with anxiety, students who struggle with any kind of self-doubt about their own aptitude. Any student who is unfamiliar with how to college, any student who's kind of unfamiliar with expectations, any student has questions about their abilities, they might underperform as a result of this rigor, because what you've done is you've intimidated them into failing. What rigor in this way actually does is create a barrier to your student success. I don't think we should think about rigor in that way. I do not think that we should make our courses hard just for the sake of them being hard. I think that our role as teachers is to facilitate our students' learning, not be a barrier to it. I think those applications of rigor really are in conflict with how I talk about empathetic course design. I think we're really not being empathetic to the needs, the desires, and the education of our students if we're being hard just to be hard, and if we're setting our classes up expecting our students to fail. Now, I will admit earlier in my career, I may have leaned a little bit more toward that kind of orientation toward rigor. So if any of you are watching out there and you took a class with me, a decade or two ago, I'm sorry. I've learned a lot and thought a lot since then. But what I try to do now is to make sure that I'm not a barrier to my students' success. I do think rigor is important to include in our classes, but I think we should think about it differently. I think we should think about rigor as fair and appropriate challenge to help our students learn and apply our content. And when we're offering our students those fair and appropriate challenges, we offer it alongside our support for them demonstrating their learning successfully in our classes through those challenges. The expectations and the rigor that we include our course should be consistent with the student populations we're teaching. Maybe we're teaching a first year experience class versus a upper level seminar. Our rigor would be different in those classes. I think it'd be different based on whether it's a course for majors or non-majors. I think it's be different based on the prerequisites and the experiences that students have had prior to taking our class. So I think we are not just unconditionally hard. I think we create challenges that are appropriate for the students that we're teaching and the content that they are learning. The challenges that we put out for our students should be ones that they want to take on. They should be ones that are consistent with the student learning outcomes in our class. They should be consistent with the abilities, the skills, and the content that our students signed up to learn in the class that we're teaching. The challenges that we offer our students should be designed to extend their learning in meaningful ways. They should not just be put out there to bring down the grades that they would potentially earn. I mentioned we should be supporting our students through these challenges. We should be genuine in our commitment and our investment in their success. We should let them know that it's going to be challenging. We should let them know why it's going to be challenging. We should let them know the value in its being challenging. And we should remind them explicitly and often that we are committed to shepherding and supporting them through those challenges. My goal as a teacher is to bring peace to my students and to my classes. Hopefully you've seen before, and we'll put a link to it. Peace stands for preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement. When I bring peace to my students, I do it with the goal of supporting their learning. And when I bring peace to my students, I can definitely do that in challenging and rigorous ways. But I have to combine that challenge and that rigor with support. Otherwise, that caring piece is just not represented. And I think that caring piece, I think that empathy that I just advocated we infuse in all of our classes is really an important component to rigor. Rigor and empathy are not mutually exclusive. You can have both in your class, but we have to think about rigor as appropriate challenge with committed support. My goal is to use challenge and rigor to extend my students' learning. I do not use rigor to set unnecessary barriers to my students' learning and success. So those are my thoughts on rigor this week. I hope they resonated with you. I hope you heard some things you agreed with, but I'd be really interested to hear what you think of my thoughts. In the comments below, let me know what you agreed with, let me know what you disagreed with, and tell me how you employ rigor in your classes. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, and share us on social media. And we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.